Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirard. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
This time on Disrupt Your Career, we're very pleased to be welcoming our longtime friend, Cor Dubois. Cor, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We're looking forward to exploring your work on the personal board of directors and other leadership questions, particularly how leaders can bring far more structure, intention, and external perspective into their career decisions. And I just want to make sure that the audience knows a little bit about you. So I can tell them that you're an executive coach, you're a former senior leader in all kinds of businesses, and the co-author of work on personal boards of directors. You have work that focuses on helping leaders move from isolated decision-making to more strategic and externally informed career thinking. Thank you, Cor, for joining me today.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
So let's get thinking, first of all, about the story behind your career. You've had a long career across leadership, strategy, and coaching. And I'm curious to understand what led you to focus specifically on how people make career decisions.
If you have a long career, you see how people thrive in how they operate, how they function, how they're happy or not so happy. But also I was struck by a quote from Manfred Ketzebrief, who I got to know way before I went to INSEAD at an intercompany university. And he had this quote of, the most important decisions in a person's life is the choice of partner and career direction. And guess what? In many cases, it's not going too well. If you're in a career space, it is an issue. And when you look at the world today, data tells me that about 50% of people are interested in changing and also proactively looking at change. Now, you add to that we are roughly at 90,000 hours at work. So you better make something out of it. It's a journey. This is not a rehearsal. In careers, you can make mistakes, but you have to limit them if you can. I think there are a few other areas as well. When you work with hundreds of people, you see that many of them are taking their opportunities purely out of, well, there is this opportunity, I have to take it. And it's fine if it works out well, but it becomes problematically when things are going differently. I think even today, when the barrier between personal life and a career, it is getting closer and closer. So all the reason to take a bit more reflective attitude towards your choices. Now, being reflective alone is not easy. That's why we have coaches as well. That's why you have mentors. That's why you like input from others. And basically that got me to the idea of, how can people take better career decisions? Or decisions in what they do. And from there, I've been reading quite a bit about the personal board of directors, but what was missing in what I read was, how do you do this? How do you get to such a board? What are some of the criteria? What is the process? And that's really basically how I started to look at it. And if you really simplify it, sometimes I make an analogy with sailing. If you sail, you want to understand a little bit where you want to go. And if it's a long journey, you need to study the maps, nutrition, water. You need a crew. And the crew can help advise you on that. As a skipper, you cannot do it alone. The other thing I'm always struck by is that a lot of people, particularly I focus more on the business leadership side, have an analytical background. If there is a challenge in the company, what do? You call specialists, you work with careers, or you call consultants. What happened if something occurs to you? There's redundancy, or you feel you're staying too long. Go figure. You're on your own, basically. Or you talk to your partner or your closest friends. And guess what? They're all going to give you the same answers you like to hear. And that's one of the reasons why I felt that there must be other ways to get more out of this. So it's a long answer, but various components from, I would say, data-driven. 90,000 hours is a big number in life. 50% is searching. And then you have, of course, the emotional side. I'm staying too long, I'm getting bored, but I'm comfortable. I don't want to change.
Beautiful. You're describing a very big picture of something very important. I'm thinking about how you first really tangibly started to observe what was going on the wrong side of career management, and thinking about, what you're describing is people taking pretty unstructured, unstrategic decisions in their lives and particularly in their careers. And I'm thinking, what about the moment where you saw the cost of that to individuals or humanity at large? Perhaps you could describe that a little bit. The virtue of getting it right on the one side, what's the cost of getting it wrong?
The cost of getting it wrong, I've experienced very early on in my early days. I was transferred to New York, late 20s, I believe, and very quickly in a senior role. We got expats coming in. And at some point, there was an agreement with, getting expats in and out. And you start to look at people like, and this is New York. You love it or you hate it. But you expect people to do some due diligence. Is this the kind of lifestyle I want? Can I handle the pressure? And I start to look at a person who was totally miserable after 1 week. So start talking about it. Yeah, I never really wanted to go. My company sent me here. In short, this person was utterly miserable. And you can prevent that by really interviewing sharply, doing better due diligence. You start to think about, wait a minute, this is an expatriation coming over. At some point, got some health issues, not showing up. So wait a minute, there must be smarter ways to do this. And if I observe it in a relatively small company, the problem must be much bigger. So that's really when I start to think about it. Okay, how can we do this better? How can we help people to better understand? And that's why I started to, not formally coaching, but talk to people, give them insights, perspectives. I wish at those days I had someone to talk to. This was a French company. I was a little bit like, should I really call to headquarters to figure out a problem with an employee? No, I can do it myself. That kind of attitude, which I think is very common in life. But it also realized, I could have been much more effective if I had taken those steps, or if I had a few people guiding me in those early days.
So that's an interesting contrast. I mean, obviously, when we're in our 20s, then we have all kinds of intuitions and ideas of things that might work or that we might like to do. And we're not surrounded by, or we can't afford to pay the experts we might otherwise retain if we were much more senior. But why is it then that even very senior leaders tend to make such important career decisions for themselves in such isolation?
I think it has a little bit to do with ego, trying to figure it out yourself. I don't want to demonstrate weakness. Sometimes it has to be confidential if there is a transfer involved. I do believe today, though, that the most senior leaders do have sparring partners and try. It is difficult, or it is different when you're looking into really transfer to the competition, which is normally your biggest area of focus where you want to change in an industry. With disrupting your career, I think it's a pure luxury to have the ability to have worked in different industries. I think as a manager, you learn from that. And that's even also what I do now in the nonprofit world. But I think it's still something, hey, should I let someone in? That's why I believe you need to surround yourself with some people you can trust, not your closest friends.
For sure. Well, let's get into it right now. For somebody hearing this expression, personal board of directors, for the very first time, how can you describe it for us in simple terms?
A personal board of directors is a group of people you identify. They are not in your inner circle. They can provide you guidance a few times a year on important topics either on a career, when you start a company, or when you're in a company, each of those board members or career circle friends have a specific role. It is not, I know John Doe, I like to get him in. No, I know John Doe because he's a critic, or he's a challenger, or he's a supporter. He or she can help me in my narrative. Could be someone who you worked at university with, or during your first steps in your career. But they need to have something linked to you. They need to have a way they have seen you perform and act in some certain capacity. Ultimately, those are the candidates to become your members of the personal board of directors.
That sounds beautiful and desirable and all kinds of other things. How should somebody think about how they go about building that board of people? What sort of perspectives are essential, and what do they need to do to make it happen?
I read a lot about the topic, but I missed a little bit. What is the clue? How do you do this? And I figured out 3 areas, 3 pillars which are important. One is the purpose. First, try to understand who you are, what you want, what you don't want, where you want to go. If you don't understand that, it's very hard to approach someone. So you need to really invest. The most important piece of constructing a personal board is to have that self-reflection on purpose. And here, a coach, a mentor, someone who knows you a bit more, you trust, is fundamental. Once you have that purpose a little bit in place, you need to look at the second pillar. That's the network. And the network, that doesn't mean how many connections you have in LinkedIn. It's who do you trust? Who has some insights to me which can be beneficial? What kind of connection can I build with this person? And the third pillar is really the strategy. How do I go about? Do I want to perform better in my own company? Do I want to make a change? Do I want to disrupt? It's very important to get that picture. Where do I want to go? What is it what I absolutely don't want to do? Who could help me potentially? And then how can I glue this piece together? Those are really the building blocks. Once you have that, it's again the projection. Where do you want to go? What do you want to change? Then you start to identify, and I always look at profiles of people, not the person. First, I want to understand, where do we need help? You need a supporter, you need a cheerleader. Sometimes you need a challenger because you go way too far and you overestimate your capabilities. Sometimes you need a connector if you want to change countries or change industries, or you need an expert. Ideally, it's about 5, 6, 7 people, and you're the CEO. You're the orchestrator in that. It also means that you set the tone a little bit. So it sounds complex. It isn't.
As with many things, simple, just not necessarily easy.
Correct.
So let's imagine we've got our personal board of directors. We're thinking about our purpose. We're thinking about how to be the CEO of that board. How should somebody actually use this board when facing a major decision?
First of all, try to define what the decision really is. Be specific. And then you start to think about a personal board of directors is in general a longer term engagement. If you have defined that particular challenge or that mission, you start to think about what kind of services do I need? So what kind of support do I need? Not so much do I need Claire or Cor. No, the thinking piece about that is, who do I know in my circle? And even if I don't know him too well, but he or she can be very instrumental. How do I get there? The easy way is what a lot of people do is, well, I know 6 people. That's my board. Well, that's not the point to do, because you get yay-sayers. Your closest friends are in general or partner risk averse. They don't want to see you hanging out. They want to really focus on, well, this is talent. He or she can go in that direction. So first, make sure that you understand what you're looking for. And secondly, you start to collect the pieces. How to do that? I had my first experience by setting up a board myself 8 or 9 years ago. My inner circle said, yeah, well, you should do this. I was pretty stubborn, so no, I don't believe it. That's why I started to identify a few people who knew me through a 35 period, university, and I stayed in touch with, more or less. I approached them by email, said, listen, can we have a conversation? It's not about politics, it's not about sports, it's about something really specific. That's the other thing which is important. I believe the rapport you need to develop with your board members is not small talk. It's very specific about a challenge and you like to have advice on. Everybody said yes when you ask a little bit for help.
People like to feel useful and valuable as well as just that they're helping. Quick question, which may or may not have a relevance and I suspect doesn't have a universal answer, but do you pay these guys?
No, I don't pay. No. But it's an interesting point. I'm a firm believer in reciprocity. I always give something back. It could be a book. It could be an article. It could be a suggestion. It is a give or take.
That makes a lot of sense, definitely. And of course, it's something that we should be doing anyway when we're networking. People tend to think, I need to network because I need this thing. So I'm going to go and ask that person. And then you sort of say, thank you. No, that's not networking. That's not humans connecting with each other. So what you're really describing is we're creating a particular circumstance for this conversation because it sits well with my purpose and I need that input, the different perspectives. And I fully intend and make it obvious that I will reciprocate in one way or another, the most appropriate way.
Yeah, the other thing too is that you open up, right? You show a spot where you're receptive and people like to follow you. How is it going? And I think the other thing too is providing feedback. The number of interactions, of course, it depends a little bit on the case, but should not be more than twice a year, a 45-minute conversation. Otherwise, it's really getting a mentoring agreement or a coaching agreement, which is not what we're looking at.
And then you are into a different sort of contract.
Yeah.
For sure.
The other thing, which is often forgotten, at some point, people lose accountability towards themselves. When you start working in a small team, which is what you do, you can feel the moral obligation to keep them informed. It really is an accountability area. And I see this also when people started to compose a board. It's so easy to say, I'm going to do this. And they realize, it's not that easy. You need to have a bit of rigor and discipline. But if you start looking and helping people to construct a board, you do it with 2 or 3 people, there is cadence.
So you allude to accountability and discipline, and I'm thinking that, one of the things that we know from your work, a personal board promises, is that it helps uncover blind spots. So it helps show our less pretty sides when they show up. What do you find you tend to see? What kind of blind spots get uncovered the most often in these circumstances?
Hidden talent. Hidden talent in general. Positive things an individual doesn't see. Positive things. The more not so positive is people overestimate. But talent. It happened to me. I was having a leading role for a mid-sized French company. I found it okay. And my friends read a job posting in HBR. He said, this has your name on it. I don't see that. But I'm a music amateur, so I love music. And this was at a big music company, one of the big 4. Start to talk with a recruiter. In 3 weeks, the deal is done. I would have never, ever thought about it. He's observed that. I think the blind spot is something, if you know what your own blind spot is, you can really make it an asset. The blind spot, people often look at, it's something, don't do that. But I look at the other way around. Find those things you don't see in yourself.
This sounds pretty seductive in so many ways. And I'm thinking, let's assume you've got one by the time you're 27, 28. And you maybe do whatever you can to keep a group, maybe it's not the constant group, but a group of multiple people around us for 30, 40 years of career. With that sort of constant twice yearly multiple group of perspectives coming in, how do we avoid becoming dependent on other people's opinions? How do we not get lost in that and somehow falter?
One point, though, I would not recommend to keep a board for life. Initially, when I started to work on this, the range was 35, 53. Why? Because a lot happened. People finish their business school or higher education, take expert roles, go for a PhD, building a family, divorce, children, you name it. A lot happened there. Nokia-Alcatel-Lucent, the former INSEAD professor and now at UCI, he teaches undergraduates. I wrote a book on networking. He convinced me you should start this initiative much earlier in life. And it's logical, right? However, to come back to your point, like any board in business too, you change people, your circumstances change, you evolve. A board needs to be dynamic. And I think that the model leans for that. It's not a formal agreement you have with a person, it's a moral agreement. It's interesting too that today boomers are working longer. The other thing I see is, the interest for non-executive directorships. You might think it starts at 60 plus. No, it starts much earlier already. You see people with portfolio careers now. The board needs to stay relevant to you. You evolve, your board needs to evolve as well.
And that therefore plays a role in keeping us from getting stuck in hearing the same kind of perspectives again and again.
Exactly.
So if we go back to this idea of we need to be the CEO of our own careers, what does it really take to remain in the CEO position of our careers, even with a strong network of advisors?
A career is never linear progress. I think what a board does, it keeps you sharp. It keeps you up to date in evolving times as they are today, geopolitically, technological wise. At the end of the day, the only answer is you. You're responsible for what you do privately and professionally. By having a privileged council, a team around you that should be able to support you. Nonetheless, shifting responsibilities in career decisions or even life decisions, that's you. There's nobody else to do that. The board helps you to be accountable. You need to be responsible as a CEO of your life.
The buck stops here.
The buck stops here. There's nobody else who's got to do that.
So let's go back to this extensive work you've done at this point. And you look across it all. What do you think distinguishes people who build intentional careers from those who drift from one opportunity to another?
Stability, eagerness to move forward in a structured way. Ultimately, this is about helping you to take better decisions, but also to be less tactical, but more strategic. They become more reflective. Is this really good for me? Should I really do this? Or do I need to look at continuing my work in this firm? So, better dealing with choices and dilemmas. I think those are a couple of real concrete examples. It's a question maybe less for today, but even more for tomorrow. If you look at boomers, they change companies on average 6 times in a lifetime career. Gen Z is expected to make those changes about 24 to 30 in a lifetime. So that has consequences. You need to be ready for that. There are more criteria to start drifting around. And the cost of drift are serious. I also believe that there are limits, age-wise, career-wise, to make mistakes. Everybody should make mistakes. That's how you learn. But there are limits. Making a big mistake on company selection when you're 53 is a bit more costly than when you do it at 33. So that's why this is so important. The more opportunistic a job comes to you, the less attention to due diligence. Is this the right fit? Am I suitable for this? Are these the right conditions? If you have 2 or 3 people who know you a little bit, it's one phone call away.
I like the point you make about making mistakes early rather than later and the relative cost of them. Let's think for a moment of the 21-year-old Cor. If you could give one piece of advice to him before any major career decisions had been taken, what would it be?
I think very important is to dream. For the 21-year-old, I'm talking about. I think you should dream your whole life, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. But it's
that
really
helps.
important at that stage, yes.
Another piece is stay curious. I think staying curious is super important. And the final piece is be generous.
And of course, you're being very generous with sharing your time and your wisdom today. And for that, we're most grateful. I'd love to know what you're currently exploring and refining in your thinking on this topic. What's coming up for you? Big milestones, big continuing dreams. Let's finish by talking about that.
First and foremost, I think that having a personal board of directors is a natural to me. I'm still looking at finding ways to institutionalize it. As a business, as a service, it's an open question. I haven't found the answers yet. What I'm really looking at from a research perspective is the future of work. That is changing rapidly. We try to figure out what is changing in that sense. Human values, are they changing? Are they evolving? Are they becoming more dominant, less dominant? And the last one is cultural similarities and differences. What I found interesting when I run these workshops, you have people from the US, the UK, Japan, it's everywhere. And most of them come to similar approaches, similar values. What is different is the interaction between the two. But those are the areas I really like to, I'm spending more time to understand it and to start writing a bit about. But the essence is, how do people make decisions, better career decisions? Because it is really important. Don't underestimate it.
Thank you, Cor. If there's anything Antoine or I, or indeed any of the listeners can do to aid you in your continuing thinking, then we will do so with generosity. It's been wonderful to spend this time. I know we could speak for much longer. I'm very grateful to you. I know Antoine is too, and we very much value the work you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Antoine, for giving this opportunity. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.